Hi, I'm Shannon Goblin from AgSolutions Australia. And in 2017, we held an equine nutrition seminar with the keynote speaker being Dr. Nerida Richards from FeedXL. Now, we all know forage is so important for horses, but the following video, Nerida is discussing what forages can't supply the horse.
So forages are exceedingly important, but there is nutrients that they can't provide. So the first thing to remember with forages is that they're highly variable in calorie, protein and mineral content. So with other clients over the years, I've had looked at about 700-800 pasture sample analyses. And the funny thing for me when we go out and sample a pasture is that we sample it today and then we dry it and send it off to the US for analysis in the next couple of days, and then it takes about 2 or 3 weeks for the analysis to come back, and by that time it's completely different to what it was when we tested it because you know, the plants have matured or the climate's changed. So they're constantly changing, which makes it really difficult sometimes to get a horse's diet right because you've got this constantly moving nutrient content in your forage. So the forage species and the stage of maturity have a huge influence on your nutrient content. And depending on the forage species available and its stage of maturity, your forage may or may not be capable of supplying your horse's full calorie and protein needs. So who's got a horse at the moment that's just on pasture or hay and it's maintaining its weight? Fine. Yep. And who's got a horse that's on pasture and hay plus needs extra feed on top of that to maintain its weight? Yeah, lucky people. Sort of. It's more expensive to feed them though, so I don't know which is worse. All right, so here's what happens with a plant. They go through these different 4 pretty distinct phases of development. So you've got this early vegetative phase where they germinate and come out of the ground and get to a certain number of leaves, and then we have this late vegetative early reproductive phase, which is probably, Gary may correct me later on this, but probably one of the better times to be grazing a pasture. And then you get into the late reproductive phase where you start to see seed heads appearing, and then they go into their mature phase where the seed head is mature, the seeds start to fall out, the plant browns off. So you'll have all seen this in your own pastures as they go through the different phases. But what's happening within the plant from a calorie perspective is in that early vegetative phase when they're really lush and young, they're very, very high in digestible energy on a dry matter basis. So if you dry them out and test them dry, they're really high. And then as the plant matures, what happens is that because it needs to stand upright and hold a seed head up, it has to start putting lignin up against its cells to give itself structural integrity and allow itself to stand up. As soon as lignin attaches to a piece of fibre, it becomes indigestible. So the more mature a plant is, the lower in energy it becomes. But there's differences. So the blue at the top is legumes, so your clovers and your lucines, and they're typically higher in calories than a temperate grass. So your temperate grasses around here would be things like prairie grass and fescue, ryegrass, liverseed grass in the summertime, and then they're better than your subtropical grasses, which typically are always lower because they're a bit more fibre, they're not as easy for an animal to digest. So these ones are things like kikuyu, paspalum. We don't have a lot of subtropical grasses around Tamworth. Mostly paspalum, I think, in summer, and some kikuyu if you've planted it. And then protein pretty much does the same thing. So the older the plant gets, the less protein it's got. So we've measured, this here is only showing sort of around 16 to 22% crude protein in an early vegetative plant. I've tested ryegrass, it was 33% crude protein. Like they can get massively high in protein, but always as they mature, you'll get this drop off in protein. So the more mature your grasses are, the less protein you're going to have. And again, there's this difference. So your lucerne and clover obviously are typically much higher in protein than a temperate grass, which is again higher in protein than a subtropical grass. So you can see how stage of maturity and also the type of plant you've got in your pasture is going to have an impact on the nutrients that your horse is getting. So if we have a look at this relative to what a horse needs, So this is a 500 kilo horse in moderate work. If we put him on that early vegetative pasture, so the young, lush green stuff, assuming he can eat enough of it, it's going to be able to meet 100% of that horse's requirement, even though he's in moderate work, which is a pretty hefty amount of work. Moderate work, it's a good hour or so of decent, get a good sweat up type work in a day, and it's obviously exceeding its protein requirement. There's a lot more protein in there, but the horse will just deal with that. He'll just use what he needs and chop up the rest and use it like a carbohydrate. If we take that same pasture though through to being mature and brown, so this might be September, and then this might be January, and a hot, dry summer. Look what happens to that horse's energy intake. Sorry, I'm so used to looking at these FeedXL things that I should tell you what we're actually looking at. So this is these graphs come from FeedXL. So FeedXL is nutrition software that I built with a couple of other people. I didn't actually do the programming, but did all the nutrition work behind it. And what it does is looks at you put in a horse's details, and then you put in what the horse is being fed, and it compares what you're feeding to the horse's requirement. So in this case, we're having a look at the horse is just on pasture, and this line here that says 100%, if we get to that, it means that that pasture is meeting 100% of that horse's requirements for calories. I look at them every day. I forget that not everyone does the same thing as me. So this one was able to meet 100% of its calorie requirement, and then the protein was sitting up over 200% of its requirement. Does that make sense now that I've explained it? Okay, and then when the pasture browns off, we're only getting to 67% of that horse's calorie requirement. So if you kept working that horse on that pasture and not topping that diet up with something that was higher in energy, the horse is going to lose weight pretty quickly because you're not meeting his requirement for energy. And also the crude protein requirement is not being met. So he'd also probably be dropping a fair bit of muscle mass as well. So how do you know when a pasture is meeting calorie requirement? Well, this is very simple. If the calorie requirement is not met, the horse is going to lose weight because it's not getting enough calories or digestible energy in its diet. If the calorie requirement is met, then the horse is going to maintain weight. And if the calorie requirement is exceeded, the horse is going to get fat. It's pretty simple. And this is where like a lot of people will say to me, oh, but you only need to look at a horse to know if it's being fed properly. And I say, well, you can see if it's getting enough calories by looking at it, but it's very difficult to see if it's getting enough selenium by looking at it. But it is really simple to see if a horse is getting enough calories. And in your little bag there's Phil's holding it up here. Know your score. So we use condition scoring in horses. So we rank a horse from 1 to 9 depending on how much body fat it's gone on it. So 1 is like a walking skeleton, and 9 is it's hard to see that it's a horse anymore because it's so fat. And we typically like to have a horse that's in work around a condition score of 5, which is you can't see its ribs when it's standing still, but if it moves to the side, you'll just see a nice little shadow of ribs there, and you can feel the ribs like you'd be able to feel the bones in the back of your hand. They're right there and really easy to feel. How do you know when a pasture is meeting protein requirements? This is a little bit more difficult. So if your horse is maintaining muscle mass, his requirements for protein are being met. But this may or may not apply to brood mares. So brood mares are a little bit tricky because some brood mares will use their own muscle protein reserves to maintain milk production. Who's seen that in a mare? And I know beef cattle are the same as well. They call it mine their own body reserves to make milk. So if they're not getting enough protein in their diet, they'll just go to their muscle and borrow protein from their muscle to maintain milk production. Other mares and cows will reduce milk production in order to maintain their own muscle mass. And I know that they're the cattle that we always used to go, oh, useless cow, because it would look after itself rather than put a lot of its own body reserves into the calf if it needed. And some mares are the same. They won't give up their own muscle mass to their foal. So the thing with muscle is it can be really difficult to assess muscle mass, especially when you're seeing a horse on a daily basis. It's quite difficult to see whether a horse is building muscle or losing muscle unless something really dramatic happens. So it is quite difficult to know if a horse's protein requirement's being met. This is kind of funny. I've been using this next photo in a couple of seminars, and this is one of the complexities of doing a seminar in your hometown. I took this photo on one of our neighbours' places as I was running my dog up the road, and my neighbours are sitting just here. I realised when they walked in the room, went, oh no, I've got one of your horses in this thing. And then turns out whoever owns the horse is also here, or a brother of the person that owns it is also here. So it's just very much a case of being busted. But this little mare is just a good example of what happens to a mare when her protein requirements aren't being met. So this little foal grew like an absolute weed, and you can see he was muscly. He was muscly enough. He's obviously getting enough milk. But you can see on the mare, like she's just mined all her own protein reserves off her top line and mined all her own protein reserves off her rump, and her shoulders really aren't there much anymore either. It was likely a calorie issue too. She probably wasn't getting enough calories, but that's what you'll see when horses don't get enough protein.